Tonight's Twitter Spaces conversation on hashtag Sunday Conversations with Songezo Zibi is going to be an open one. That means we are not going to have an expert to discuss and explain certain very important concepts to us about national policy, international developments, and how they intersect with South Africa's economy and South Africa's political economy. Instead, I want to take this opportunity to recognize that every Sunday we increasingly have a growing community of people that want to discuss these issues. And I think it's important that I share my own motive for starting these Twitter Spaces conversations and eventually making them a regular thing. I also want to share a bit about where I am hoping these conversations will go in the future. And lastly, I would like to take some inputs from the participants in terms of the kind of issues we should be discussing and sometimes the kind of people we should bring into the conversation. So I am going to start by sharing the motive for me for starting these Twitter Spaces conversations every Sunday. I have been reflecting over the last few months and maybe even years about what we do on social media, one, and secondly, what tends to occupy our time. And I realize that one of the things we have lost over time is choice. And that choice has been lost not because we have no choice, but there are certain things we have chosen to not do. Twitter and Facebook have become toxic. There is a lot of disinformation. It is really difficult to debate issues. It is difficult to reason and to have a nuanced conversation about lots of issues that people get to discuss. A lot of the time, those pertain to politics, they pertain to socioeconomic conditions, they pertain to racism, they pertain to gender-based violence. So it's social, political, and economic issues that we get to discuss on these platforms. And yet that discussion often leaves you exhausted because you spend a lot of time trying to sift fact from fiction, trying to tell who is telling the truth and who is lying, who's got a good motive and who's got a bad motive. And a lot of the time, what passes for debate is really screaming at one another. It is insulting one another. So it became clear to me that it appears that we have lost the ability to listen and to debate properly. And yet the things that we talk about are really, really important. So having celebrated many years ago the democratization of the internet with the advent of Twitter, Facebook, MySpace in the beginning, as well as other platforms, we have also seen the dangers that we see on these platforms because all the social and political ills exist on these same platforms and they are on steroids. So we spend a lot of time admonishing people, saying people are lying, trying to reason and not being successful. And what do? Eventually we retreat into a corner of confirmation bias where we have a conversation amongst people who only agree with one another. And this causes further divisions in society because it means we are still not able to get together into one space and arrive at a consensus. So that's just one of the reasons I became dejected with these social media platforms. Now, some of you may remember that some years ago, I used to have a verified Twitter account. So I decided one day to lock it and to audit it. And of course, when you lock your account, you lose your verification status. So I decided to lock it and to audit it so that I could kick out all the bots. I have over 8,000 bots and other accounts following me, some of which spend a lot of time basically on insults. Now, I'm not unique in this. A lot of us have the same problem. In fact, almost everybody has got a similar problem. But with the advent of Twitter Spaces, I realized that we actually have an opportunity to choose. And the choices we have do not just revolve around social media. They extend to the world of social change, of political change, and economic change. So what are those choices? The first choice for me was that we could choose how we use platforms like Twitter. And Twitter Spaces offered that opportunity. Of course, on other platforms like Facebook, there is a room and there are other platforms that are available. But for me, Twitter Spaces gives you the opportunity to listen and to participate while you're doing other things, because you don't need to watch a video. So I realized we have an opportunity here to choose what we are going to talk about. And the people that join that conversation are people who are interested in that conversation. And we can choose to discuss anything, basically. For me, the state of the country, the state of our society, and dare I say, the really dire state of our country and our society means that I choose to discuss the type of things that are going to get a lot more of us better informed about how the various issues that affect our lives work. So that explains the kind of discussions and topics that we've had over the last few months. And I intend to continue along that vein. So that is the first thing. The second thing is that we also have a choice in terms of what we are going to care about. So we can care a lot and spend a lot of energy and time on people who peddle misinformation, who insult and so on, or we can choose to spend time discussing really solid ideas and propositions about how to take our society forward and trying to inspire one another to excel as active citizens and leaders in the spaces in which we choose to be active. One of the things I have realized is that tweeting on our phones or on our computer and expressing a view and threading and so on, of course it's got an impact on some people, but it does not translate to the change that we want to see. So having discussed these issues on social media, on Twitter, and luckily we've got a platform on which we can discuss these issues in a reasonable tone, we can ask questions politely, we can contest and so on, we need to say what is to be done. And I realize that we also have chosen to not be organized over the years. Now, what do we know? What we know is that our society is broken. We know that our politics is broken. We know that our public institutions are broken. We know that there is receding trust between various communities in South Africa for various reasons, including the use of social media by populists and other dangerous characters to sow divisions so that we can spend as much time as possible on the same social media platforms arguing, and then in the end not having the energy, the opportunity, and the time to do anything about it. And so their role is to keep us distracted from the really important things that we need to do something about. So the second choice we must exercise is what to care about enough to do something about. And we have got further opportunities there. There is opportunity to find out who cares about similar things and joining them in action. There is also opportunity to begin new platforms, to begin new gatherings where we choose to care about certain things, about certain institutions, and play a role within the context of what we are able to do. I think one of the things we have fooled ourselves about over the years is that in order to drive change in society, we necessarily need to be members of a political party. We need to be party politicians. That is not so. This is a choice that we have made over the years to believe that change can only be driven through political parties only. So that is a second choice that I have made, to say it's not going to be just about Twitter Spaces for me. And in the conversation tonight, I am going to talk about what other possibilities are there to convert our knowledge and our discussions into some form of action within the context of what we are able to do. I recognize that we all have jobs. We all have family to look after. We all have all sorts of things that we have to do. But one thing I know is that if we choose to only tweet and only talk and do nothing, nothing is going to change. The third point is that I think we have also got to believe over the years that we do not have the potential and the capability to lead the change and talk about big things and lead in those big things. Now, I am the one person who often talks about how young Tito Mboweni, Trevor Manuel, Toko Tidiza, and others were in 1994 when they were in cabinet. But they were able to get into cabinet because they had been active, because they had made themselves available, and they had taken on the responsibility of leadership without somebody saying, you will be a leader. They chose to care about certain things enough and to be active enough for them to be noticed so that they could get into cabinet in the context of the African National Congress. Honestly, I sit and I ask myself almost every day, is it possible for me to be able to drive the change I want to see if I make myself unavailable and I continue to care about things that are not going to lead to the change that I want? I've taken a decision to care a hell of a lot more about the things that I write about, to care enough to begin these conversations, to care enough to think about other platforms that we can use, about other content that we can create, but trying to make our society better. I don't have resources. I've got a camera, I've got a phone, I've decided to start with what I have. And I ask myself every day, what if thousands more of us cared enough to do the same and to work together in order to do the same? What would happen if we were to do that? I think we'd begin to see the change. And the last point that I want to make is about horizons. It's about the limits we set ourselves. So I often hear conversation about the fact that there are no political alternatives in South Africa. Now, of course, I am one of those people who has seen how the majority of people are not voting anymore compared to those who actually do vote. Right? Because people are disgruntled with political parties, they're disgruntled with the political system, and they don't want to participate anymore. But that is not good for a democracy. The reason we believe we do not have choices is because we refuse to make sure those choices are on the table, those alternatives are on the table. That's why we don't have alternatives. So there is a learned helplessness, it seems to me, especially among the middle and the professional classes, where we're looking to someone from somewhere to rescue our unemployed siblings and cousins and neighbors and have the right policies so that we can behave like buffet customers in a restaurant or a hotel where we say, I don't want this, I don't want that. No, there's nothing that I like here. So I'm going to sit back and wait until something that works comes along. If we continue doing that, there will never be something there will never be something that we can choose because we refuse to develop those alternatives, or we do not believe we've got the talent and the energy and the drive to do it. So the last point I want to make is that we need to accept the responsibility or the potential and the possibility of political alternatives. That is not treason. It's normal democratic thought and democratic action. Because amongst people who join these spaces are really talented people. They are accountants, they are economists, they are security specialists, they are local government, they are engineers and so on. They are all sorts of talented people. South Africa is not short of intellectual capacity. South Africa is short of self-belief and will. Among those that in all other societies that have seen change in recent times or historically have driven the change. That happens to be the most dejected community in South Africa who believe themselves to be helpless. And so we must complain about the ANC and complain about the DA, complain about the EFF. Guys, come on, let's not do that anymore. Who are we waiting for in terms of who will drive the change? So starting a conversation about what is wrong with our country, choosing to have that conversation in a way that is constructive, that begins to talk about ideas and where we are going to take those ideas is a responsible thing to do. It doesn't cost us anything other than time. And we can make choices about how we spend our time. That's what I've decided to do. So tonight when we have that conversation, I would like to share more of this, to hear more from you about what you think about what I've just shared in this video and what I am going to be sharing tonight, so that we can have a constructive conversation that gives us hope of a brighter future for ourselves, our families, our friends, our children, our relatives, and so on. And just ordinary South Africans, we may not even know. We've got enough resources in South Africa, enough wealth, and that in terms of natural and intellectual wealth, to be a world beater. But we choose to spend our time with things that are not going to move the needle. And I think it's time that we stop doing that and choose to spend our time wisely, our energies wisely, our resources wisely to drive the change that we want to see. And I think change always begins with a conversation. That's what I'd like us to talk about tonight. See you tonight, 6 o'clock, #Sunday Conversations on Twitter Spaces. My friend Laura Dotsengang and Luzuko and others are going to join me to assist with that conversation. I can't wait to talk to you. Cheers.